Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are undertaking, well, a really deep dive into some material that is not only complex, but uh, profoundly provocative.
It really is.
Our source material is this systematic, just relentless piece of social critique that tries to merge ancient moral philosophy, contemporary psychology, and even theological frameworks to answer one massive, difficult question.
And that question is, what is the nature of evil itself? And does a specific, powerful modern ideology, in this case, ideological feminism, actually qualify as its embodiment?
Yeah, this is truly heavy lifting, and the author, Steve Brule, he signals right away that this isn't going to be your typical political or sociological argument.
Not at all. His stated mission is to come to terms with ideological feminism, which he, sees as this destructive force. But to do that fairly, he argues he first has to build an entire comprehensive framework for defining the very nature and mechanism of evil.
And he pulls from everywhere.
Right. He's taking inspiration from sources as varied as the psychiatrist M. Scott Peck, the philosopher Spinoza, and even concepts from modern physics.
Exactly. And the central claim here is monumental. He's arguing that evil isn't just a metaphor for human cruelty or suffering. No, the author argues it has an independent, non-supernatural existence.
Which is a whole concept we'll have to unpack.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that it manifests through a phenomenon he calls ideological possession. And the ultimate conclusion we'll get to is that ideological feminism operates as this possessive entity driven by primal envy, and it fundamentally leads its adherents away from what he defines as objective reality, or God.
So our mission today is pretty ambitious. We have to be really meticulous and impartial here.
Yes.
We are going to unpack this framework step by step. We're going to start with the author's philosophical and psychological foundation for defining personal evil, which borrows heavily from M. Scott Peck's clinical insights.
Okay.
Then we'll shift into the author's highly original cosmological framework, basically, how destructive ideas gain an independent life in what he calls the new sphere.
And finally, and this is where it gets most controversial, we will analyze the specific historical, clinical, and anecdotal evidence that's presented in the source material to support the claim that feminism is not just flawed, but truly evil.
It's a deep examination of a modern movement, but viewed through, the oldest moral lens humanity has.
Okay, let's unpack this foundational structure. We begin with that psychological and theological lens, and immediately we run into M. Scott Peck, the psychiatrist, famous for The Road Less Traveled. Why does the author start there?
Well, Peck's work on evil, especially in his book People of the Lie, is crucial. And it's crucial because he started as a secular clinical psychiatrist, but his decades of practice forced him toward this profound and really uncomfortable conclusion.
Which was what, exactly?
Peck, who is a moderate Christian, found that in certain clinical cases, we're talking extreme destructive narcissism, real cruelty, the mechanism of the patient's behavior just couldn't be understood or treated with purely secular psychological models.
Lazy for enough.
They weren't. He concluded that any adequate science of evil has to recognize the reality of the supernatural.
Okay, now, that term supernatural usually triggers a halt for a lot of listeners. How does the source material clarify Peck's use of that word? Because it's a loaded term.
It is, and Brule clarifies that Peck didn't necessarily mean ghosts or miracles in the traditional sense. He meant anything that currently lies outside the boundaries of description within our current scientific models.
So it's almost like a moving target.
It's a moving target, exactly. Yesterday's supernatural is often tomorrow's physics. But for Peck, the mechanism of truly malicious, consistent destruction had to have a source that transcended simple biology or socioeconomic conditioning.
It had to be bigger than that.
It had to be understood within the traditional Christian model, where human life is seen as a titanic struggle between the forces of good and evil, with the individual human soul serving as the battleground.
So the focus isn't on some massive cosmic war out there, but on the individual's choice, right here.
Precisely.
Which brings us to the actual immediate mechanism of personal evil. How does an ordinary person go from just making a bad choice to embracing something the author would call evil?
Peck focused entirely on the advantageous lie. This is the ignition point. The whole mechanism begins when a person acts on an idea that is fundamentally deceitful, but promises them an immediate benefit. Or, more often, it lets them avoid some necessary pain or responsibility.
It's the moment they choose comfort over reality.
That's it. And the source material stresses that this is where the chain reaction starts, because that one initial lie, it sets the person on this fixed path.
It's not a one-off.
Not at all. Because having accepted the lie for an advantage, The individual then has to double down to protect it. They start creating this closed world of lies, turning the deceit of others and, crucially, the deceit of self into what he calls an immutable habit.
And because they have to maintain this illusion of their own goodness while they're acting cruelly, they gradually lose all capacity for true remorse.
Right. Because remorse would mean facing the lie, and they just can't afford to do that.
And what's the final horrific result of this process, according to Peck?
The individual essentially becomes the embodiment of the destructive force they first called into being. Brule references Peck's observation that these individuals reach a stage where they desire to cause harm even without any personal, immediate benefit.
They become truly malicious.
Truly. They get to the point where they seek, as Peck so chillingly put it, to kill for the pleasure of killing, just to exercise and prove their control over reality.
What's really insightful here, and what makes this definition so hard to counter, is that the people who embody this often look, well, they look entirely normal.
Yeah.
They present as respectable, even righteous, as Peck observed clinically.
The camouflage is fascinating, isn't it? Evil has to maintain a facade of respectability to function in society. It operates through subtle, consistent cruelty, all dressed up in plausible deniability.
And Brule offers a clinical case study from Peck's work that just grounds this concept in an unforgettable way. The story of Bobby and the gun. Let's spend some time on this because it really defines the subtlety of the evil the author is describing. Bobby was a troubled teenager committed to an institution. What happened?
So Bobby was a 15-year-old delinquent, and he had recently lost his older brother who had died by suicide. The family was affluent, respectable, supposedly good Christian people.
Right.
And Bobby asked for a tennis racket for Christmas. When Christmas came, his parents gift-wrapped and presented him with the very gun his deceased brother had used to kill himself.
I mean, just on the face of it, the level of emotional blindness or cruelty is almost incomprehensible.
It's staggering.
The unspoken message, as the source points out, is just one of profound malice. You too should kill yourself, and here's exactly how. It is an undeniable absence of love, masquerading as a holiday gesture.
And when Peck confronted the parents, expecting maybe some deep-seated mental illness or obvious psychopathy, they used a perfect example of the advantageous lie, wrapped in this perfect, plausible deniability.
What did they say?
They claimed they were just simple working people trying to save money by regifting. They immediately deflected the confrontation by saying, "We're not educated people like you. We haven't been to college and learned all kinds of fancy ways of thinking."
So their lie was that they were too simple, too uneducated to understand the massive psychological trauma they were inflicting. They made themselves immune to moral critique.
Exactly. This is the definitive characteristic of the advantageous lie becoming an engine of evil. They refused to confront the psychological impact. They refused reality because confronting it would mean admitting they were motivated by a profound malice that had nothing to do with saving money.
And by denying responsibility and hiding behind that facade of simple ignorance, they were able to continue their actions while maintaining their outward appearance of propriety.
And Peck saw this clinical pattern over and over again, this refusal to acknowledge responsibility for the harm caused, always blaming external factors or the victim. That refusal to recognize reality, Brule argues, is the very essence of the evil act.
That sets the psychological and moral stage. But to apply this to a whole social movement, the author needs a much bigger map. He transitions now from Peck's clinical observations into his own massive panentheistic framework to explain where these ideas, these dormant advantageous lies, actually reside before they're called into existence.
Yeah, this is where we shift into deep cosmology.
It's a huge shift in intellectual terrain.
And it's necessary, because the author's claim is that if you want to critique a movement like feminism, which is ultimately seeking meaning and purpose, you can't just use secular tools which deny meaning in the first place.
So what's his worldview?
Brule identifies it as a form of panentheism. He modifies Spinoza's philosophy.
Panentheism.
Yeah.
Okay, for the listener who might be prepping for a meeting and needs the quick definition, it's the idea that God is in everything and everything is in God, but God also transcends the universe.
Right. It's different from pantheism, which just says God is the universe. For Brule, the universe is not God's finished product, like a perfect statue left on a pedestal. It is God being born, perpetually in the process of creation and becoming.
And this view lets him claim that nothing is truly supernatural.
Exactly. Reality is everything, including what lies outside science's current grasp. The distinction between the divine and the mundane, it just collapses. God is immanent, alive in the process.
And to make this reality tangible, the author uses this really powerful metaphor, the Word of God.
Yes, and this is where he connects to deep philosophical tradition. All spoken and written words, the vast libraries of human literature, those are of man. But the objects of the manifest universe, every star, every particle, and us ourselves, are the literal words of God.
This is referencing the creation narrative in Genesis 1.3. And God said, "Let there be light." So God doesn't physically make light. God speaks light into existence.
Right. Cosmic consciousness dreamt or spoke life into existence, and the sum of creation is a long poem.
A poem in progress.
A poem in progress, striving toward a harmonious conclusion, a singular, integrated being of light. And he even references contemporary cutting-edge science, specifically Nobel laureate Roger Penrose's conformal cyclic cosmology, to suggest that even in modern physics, there are hints that the universe operates in cycles, suggesting a profound narrative structure to reality.
This view is essential because it establishes the battleground between science and meaning. If the universe is a long poem, then it inherently has meaning.
That's the crux of it. Science provides powerful models. They let us build bridges, launch rockets, cure diseases. But Brule argues these models are hallucinations of reality.
Hallucinations?
They are not reality itself. They are highly effective simplifications that point at reality but can never capture the whole thing. The moment you mistake the map for the territory, the model for the reality, you commit a huge error.
And the central conflict he's fighting against is that nihilistic claim, which has been popular since the Enlightenment, that the universe has no meaning or purpose and that we're all just a meaningless accident.
Yeah. And that struggle with meaning is what keeps us connected to reality. Brule argues that grappling with meaning is what keeps us anchored. The moment we turn away from that difficult, continuous task of self-reflection and asking, why are we here? We start to create existential angst, and unconsciously we spread chaos, pain, and destruction.
It's the ultimate consequence of Socrates' warning that the unexamined life is not worth living. If you refuse to examine yourself, you discard your true self and you become a fool.
And this leads to Descartes' foundational insight. Cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. To realize the true self, the I am, is to reject the mind's constant distractions and hallucinations, which include the ego, the advantageous lie, all the false stories we tell ourselves, in favor of the reality, which is the I am.
And this radical separation of the true self from the ideas projected onto reality is what prepares us to understand how ideological possession works.
That separation is the key bridge to the next major section. Understanding where these destructive ideas get an independent existence, we're moving into the mechanism of ideological possession and how this true self can be killed by a foreign idea.
The distinction between evil as a corrosive idea and person as the host is absolutely vital here, isn't it?
It's everything. The ideology, the advantageous lie, can possess a mind until the person inside is fundamentally killed by that invading idea, leaving a shell that's just driven by the ideology's will. And these ideas, Brule notes, are constructed of memes.
Richard Dawkins' concept, cultural units, transmitted through writing, speech, or ritual that evolved by natural selection, kind of like genes competing for survival.
Right, but Brule takes this concept much further than just catchy slogans. He says interconnected memes form an aggregate, an ideological perspective, and this aggregate starts to function like a singular, self-aware entity that influences the possessed group.
And the source names this powerful aggregate the meme master.
Yep.
So it's not just a collection of ideas, it's like an operating system, a supervisory control program, as the source calls it, or a master-slave controller that directs the behavior of the ideologically possessed.
That's a great way to put it. This meme master has an existence of its own that evolves independently of any single host. If the individual human mind is the hardware, the meme master is the malware that takes over the system and starts running its own script.
And this meme master lives in a specific place, the noosphere. The sphere of reason and ideas. The noosphere is usually associated with thinkers like Teilhard de Chardin, referring to the sum total of human consciousness. But the author adapts this, right? What exactly is the noosphere in Brule's framework?
He adapts it as the sphere of all active ideas. Think of it like the highly volatile RAM memory of reality. It's not a physical space, but the space of relationships. It exists in the space between objects, relationships, and forces, which, according to his cosmology, is precisely where consciousness itself resides.
Okay, this is a highly abstract concept. We need to dedicate some time to the illustrative examples the source provides to ground this for the listener.
Good idea.
The source gives three specific metaphors for this non-physical existence. Let's start with the ecosystem.
Okay, so take the ecosystem of the African savanna. There is a permanent, complex conflict built into the structure. The lion chases the antelope. The hyena tries to steal the lion's kill. This constant struggle, this relationship of predator and prey, has no single visible physical existence. You can't point to the conflict itself on a map.
It lies dormant, built into the DNA and the habitat, existing only as a relationship that is constantly activated.
It exists only in the noosphere. It's the essential tension of the ecosystem. It is real, it shapes reality, yet it is non-material. The second example is even more foundational. The covalent bond in a molecule.
The bond that holds atoms together. We draw lines for them in diagrams, but they aren't literal sticks holding spheres together.
No. The bond itself is not a physical object you can measure independently. It is the observable result of the relationship between objects and fundamental forces, like the sharing of electrons. Chemistry, physics, life itself. They're impossible without this bond.
And yet, it has no independent physical existence.
None. It exists in the noosphere, in that space between the nuclei.
And the third example is the most relatable, the bond of shared human experiences, relationships.
Right. That bond, the love for a child, loyalty to a friend, the shared history that motivates profound sacrifice, you can't find it physically. You can't open a human skull and find the relationship physically present.
But it can dictate monumental actions.
It can survive physical separation and last a lifetime. It is an idea held and shared in the imagination, built from ideas hard-coded into the structure of reality. The noosphere is this transcendent relational space where latent ideas, both creative and destructive, reside and actively evolve.
And here is where the moral cosmology truly crystallizes with the antimatter analogy.
Yeah.
This defines the nature of evil in his system.
This is the key distinction. In Brule's panentheistic view, God is reality. God is the sum total of the conscious, striving, becoming universe. The devil, or evil, is called into existence within the noosphere.
And the analogy uses antimatter. Antimatter is coded into the manifest universe. It's possible, but it doesn't exist naturally. We have to create it in a lab under specific high-energy circumstances.
Precisely. Evil is coded into the universe as a possibility, a latent pattern of destruction, but we are the ones who call it to life through the choice of the advantageous lie.
And this defines our moral dilemma. It is unavoidable that we will notice evil, encoded as a possibility in the noosphere. It might be a momentary thought of revenge, a convenient deflection of blame, or a seductive lie of power.
And the moment we notice that idea, we are thrust into the battle between good and evil. We have to choose. Do we give that dormant, destructive idea life by acting on it, or do we let it lie dormant?
The simple act of noticing and choosing is the battleground for integrity.
It makes the battle for integrity a constant, subtle process. It requires vigilant self-awareness, something that must be a cultivated habit, because the temptation is often so plausible and advantageous, just like the lie from Bobby's parents.
And the source uses one of the most famous moral narratives in Western culture to explore this conflict, Christ's temptation, to show how this plays out in the human struggle for integrity.
Right. The story of Christ's temptation is presented as the story of the human struggle for integrity written in grand metaphor. It makes visible the conflict happening constantly in the noosphere. Brule argues that ideological feminism functions as a grand temptation set before modern women, mirroring Jesus' 3 trials in the wilderness.
Let's walk through these because this is the specific bridge between the high theology and the social critique. Temptation 1, turning rock to bread.
So Satan encourages Jesus, who has been fasting, to use his power to deny reality, to command that a rock become sustenance. The promise is, believe this advantageous illusion and you will be nourished and powerful.
And Brule argues the parallel in contemporary ideology is the insistence that a person can be any gender they imagine, regardless of physical reality.
Or the political insistence that telling yourself you are oppressed is the way to become empowered. In both cases, the temptation is to abandon a grip on objective reality for an illusion that grants immediate psychological or social advantage. Jesus maintained his integrity by holding that a rock remains a rock, regardless of belief.
The maintenance of reality is the first defense against evil. Okay, temptation 2 is the invitation to jump off a cliff, believing angels will save him.
This trial is about escaping necessary responsibility or consequence.
Okay.
The author interprets this metaphorically as abandoning self-control and escaping responsibility for one's present situation. The source claims the feminist parallel is the belief that one can unilaterally abort a child without emotional, spiritual, or physical consequence, or abandoning the traditional commitments of family life in favor of an illusion of freedom. It's the abandonment of necessary struggle.
And the source material uses the 1991 film Thelma and Louise as the definitive cultural manifestation of this specific temptation.
Yeah, this is a real deep cut into cultural analysis. In the film, the protagonists feel victimized and trapped by men in society. They choose a path of radical, increasingly violent self-determination, which culminates in their famous choice.
Driving their car off the edge of the Grand Canyon into a suicidal plunge.
Exactly. And the feminist critical take, which celebrated that ending as the ultimate expression of personal liberation and sisterhood, is precisely what the author identifies as the acceptance of the devil's deal.
So he analyzes that cinematic moment not as liberation, but as a flight from accountability.
Right. They chose self-destruction and death instead of confronting the consequences of their actions. The author asserts that the ideology, when faced with necessary suffering, encourages abandoning responsibility for this euphoric, ultimately nihilistic moment of finality. He critiques the celebration of that choice as fundamentally demonic, leading to death and destruction, because it validates the rejection of real-world consequences.
And the final, most insidious temptation is dominion. Satan offers Jesus all the kingdoms of the world and their glory if he worships him.
And the author notes the fundamental lie underpinning this offer. Satan only has custodial authority. The world already belongs to Jesus, who is the Son of God. The temptation is to betray one's nature, one's intrinsic relationship to reality and God, for a cheap, temporary mirage of power.
And the parallel to ideological feminism is clear here, the promise of masculine power.
Yes. Brule points to contemporary feminist rhetoric, claims like the end of men, the future is female, and the active pursuit of institutional dominance. These mirror Satan's false promise of dominion.
So if women accept the lie that they can achieve ultimate power by denying reality, their own nature, vilifying men, they're promised the world.
But the consequence, the author argues, is that they are plunged into eternal rage and torment because the power they seek is purely external, never truly obtainable. They've traded their soul for a mirage of himself. The power was never Satan's to give in the first place.
That completes the framework. From Peck's clinical observations of the advantageous lie, through the noosphere where ideas reside, to the universal struggle of integrity symbolized by the three temptations. Now we move to the final, most controversial stage. The specific evidence presented in the source material supporting the claim that ideological feminism is the embodiment of this evil.
And we have to begin with the supposed historical root, what the author terms the central feminist lie, or the oppression story. The core tenet that underpins all subsequent feminist thought is this idea that men successfully conspired to oppress women throughout all of history.
And this tenet was enshrined in the 1848 Declaration of Sentiments at Seneca Falls, New York. The author highlights that the key author, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, was not some downtrodden worker. She was a member of the upper-class gentry, living a life of pampered luxury and power.
Right. And the source argues that this narrative was a deliberate choice. Instead of celebrating women's unique strengths and societal roles, Stanton crafted the claim to explain women's lack of formal political power by shifting the narrative entirely to men hold women down.
Which allowed them to demand power based on grievance rather than earned merit or historical responsibility.
Exactly. And the source claims this narrative ignores critical historical facts.
Like what? What specific facts does Brule argue were swept aside?
Well, several points are raised. First, most men couldn't vote at the time of Seneca Falls either. The franchise was restricted by property, race, and income, not just gender.
Okay.
Second, historical records consistently show that women's status, especially among the landed classes, often historically eclipsed that of ordinary working men. And most critically, the source argues that men suffering through conscription, industrial accidents, shorter life expectancy often eclipsed women's, particularly because women were historically shielded from the harshest realities of pre-modern life, a necessary protection for the species to continue.
So by claiming he is oppressed her on all sides, this narrative serves as a clear cult leader tactic for enemy formation, justifying the vilification of men, the patriarchy, and the elevation of women as morally superior victims.
Absolutely. The lie creates an external enemy to galvanize the group. The source contends that the claim itself, that men successfully conspired across millennia to oppress women, is so vast and unsupportable that the feminist project should have collapsed under academic scrutiny.
But it didn't.
Instead, the author argues, feminists succeeded in rewriting history by aggressively infiltrating universities, establishing quotas and affirmative action for their narrative, and systematically intimidating any critics.
The power of this lie, once noticed and given life, is, well, it's devastatingly illustrated with that anecdote of the 11-year-old girl who falsely accused her father of rape during her parents' divorce.
This is a chilling example that illustrates how quickly the advantageous lie provides power, even to a child. In a moment of anger, the girl recognized the immense power inherent in that simple, malicious statement, knowing the system would believe her instantly.
And her father went to jail for 10 years.
10 years. And crucially, she confessed at age 23, long after the damage was done. When she confessed, she didn't say, "I'm sorry for the ruin I caused." She said, "I will be free on the inside," only after he was freed.
That is profound. It demonstrates that the lie doesn't just damage the victim, it traps the perpetrator. The act of evil contains its own punishment, trapping the individual in a prison of guilt and a poisoned conscience until the integrity, the I am, is nearly dead.
And this leads directly to the next point of evidence, the connection between evil and death, drawing on a broader psychological definition. Peck defined evil as that which kills spirit-breaking autonomy, discouraging thought, fostering dependency. Brule then connects this to Erich Fromm's broadened definition of necrophilia.
And we usually think of necrophilia only as physical attraction to the dead.
Right, but Fromm broadened it to include the desire to control others, make them dependent, diminish their originality, and foster their slow psychological death. It's the spiritual equivalent of loving the lifeless.
And Brule applies this to ideological feminism, claiming the movement demonstrates a profound obsession with death and destruction.
Yeah, the evidence he cites includes the casual use of phrases like kill all men, smash the patriarchy, and the systematic celebration of abortion not as a tragic necessity, but as a joyful act of liberation.
And the source then goes to great lengths to provide direct, specific quotes from celebrated, prominent figures within media and academia, not just anonymous internet trolls.
No, and they are shocking. He points to statements advocating for generalized hatred and miserable death for men. All men are scum and must die. I get joy out of being cruel to old white men. And the utterly shocking line, all of them deserve miserable death, while feminists laugh as they take their last gasps.
We have to pause there. This is a crucial pivot point in the author's argument. The source argues that because these figures are celebrated, protected, and promoted within mainstream institutions, it confirms that ideological feminism operates not just as a political movement, but as an extremist hate movement that has successfully normalized malice.
And the author connects this specific bile back to the advantageous lie. The lie of ultimate historical oppression justifies the hatred, and the hatred is the mechanism by which the individual exercises the power promised by the meme master. It's the constant payment of rage required to maintain the lie of oppression.
The claim of veneration of death is further supported by the chilling analysis of the Canadian feminist film Kissed. We need to explore this in detail.
The film Kissed was not fringe, it was celebrated in feminist circles. It centers on the main character, Sandra, who reserves her deep, passionate love only for the dead. The source states the film presents necrophilia not as a pathology, but as an erotic spirituality, an alternative path to fulfillment.
And the climax involves her suitor, Matt, committing suicide in her presence.
It does, and her reaction is the key to the author's critique. As Matt is dying, Sandra watches his life drain away, and she is transported into an ecstatic release.
She doesn't feel guilt or grief.
No, she achieves fulfillment through the man's demise. The film asks the viewer to see this celebration of death, psychopathy, and nihilism as beautiful and holy, a complete veneration of evil that rejects healthy, life-affirming human emotion.
And the source points out that the director of this film was awarded a faculty position at a major university.
Demonstrating institutional validation of this viewpoint, it's presented as a spiritual opposition to life itself. And this is linked back to the celebration of abortion.
How so?
The source argues that feminists often celebrate abortion not as an unpleasant, necessary choice, but as an act of power and ultimate independence. This attitude, the rejection of the sacred nature of life, the derision of marriage and motherhood as slavery, is viewed by Brule as an orientation toward narcissistic power that stands in direct opposition to reality and the perpetuation of the species. Everything about the ideology, he concludes, is oriented toward breaking the spirit of life, which is his definition of evil.
We've established the framework, the mechanism of possession, and the evidence of its manifestation. But we must now address the author's ultimate why. What is the driving root cause force behind this specific ideological possession?
The source points to one of the 7 deadly sins, arguing the root cause is envy. Christian theologians define envy not merely as jealousy wanting what someone else has, but the desire to destroy another's good fortune precisely because their excellence lessens one's own.
So feminist demands aren't just about parity. They are typically, we want what men have, paired with a desire to dismantle or punish men for having it in the first place.
That's the key distinction. This envy requires feminists to actively ignore or deny massive historical facts. They have to ignore that men often paid with their lives to spare women the harshest realities of pre-modern existence, or that men's inventions often drastically eased women's lives.
Everything from basic sanitation to obstetric hand washing, the tampon baby formula.
Exactly. These facts, the source argues, point to female privilege in certain contexts, which directly undermines the oppression claim and therefore fuels the envy.
And if the ideological movement only covets masculine measures of value, strength, speed, competence in the external world, what is the inevitable crippling cost to the feminine identity?
The unspoken message, the source claims, is profoundly damaging. Woman is worth less than man. By seeking to usurp only masculine roles and rejecting the traditional feminine world, feminists demean and devalue the world women traditionally create: home, family, the social fabric, the nurturance of new life.
Which leads inevitably to self-loathing because they are effectively rejecting their own nature.
Right, and the ensuing rage and self-contempt is then externalized and directed at the patriarchy, which the author views as a stand-in for existence itself, or God, mirroring Satan's original envy against the creator.
It's the ultimate projection.
It is. The inner turmoil caused by rejecting their own worth has to be placed externally onto an omnipotent, malevolent enemy. Brule even connects the resulting emotional state, the constant paranoia, the victimhood narrative, the inability to accept objective facts, to symptoms consistent with psychotic-like experiences, or PLE.
Like what?
Believing others are trying to hurt them, strange feelings, and difficulty distinguishing reality from fantasy.
But the author provides a crucial historical timing for this vulnerability. Why did this ideological possession take root precisely when it did?
The source argues that ideological feminism only emerged after the scientific revolution and the subsequent rise of atheism. This is the crux of the author's theory of the root cause, and it's critical for the listener to grasp this sociological diagnosis.
Tell us in detail why the scientific revolution created a crisis of meaning specifically devastating to the female psyche.
Well, the rise of atheism asserted that science negated God, leading to the idea that life was a meaningless, random accident. For men, whose historical identity was often tied to building, exploring, and technologically conquering the physical world, the scientific revolution, while destabilizing faith, simultaneously offered a new source of meaning: mastery, progress, invention.
A new kingdom, as it were.
Exactly. But for women, it was, according to the source, catastrophic. The womb, the vessel for life renewal, sits at the absolute heart of traditional female identity, the sacred ability to co-create with God or reality.
So if life is declared a meaningless, accidental mistake,
Then the identity built on nurturing and generating life is also rendered meaningless and absurd. This core identity was blown to pieces by nihilism.
so unable to counter the resulting nihilism or rebuild a sense of inherent purpose in nurturing life, feminists sought meaning by entirely usurping male identity. They coveted the masculine world, which was the only source of meaning and mastery that they felt was left after their own foundational identity had been demolished.
This meaning vacuum is viewed by Brule as the invisible hand of evil, preparing the ground for ideological possession. The lie of oppression gave them a script, but the underlying drive was the search for existential meaning in a universe that had suddenly been declared cold and random.
We established that evil, once called into existence, is purely destructive and uncontrollable, ultimately destroying those who try to harness it. How does the source show that ideological feminism is self-destructive and fails its own practitioners and the institutions it captures?
Brule asserts that evil, by its nature, has to destroy its host because it's fundamentally oriented away from reality. He uses contemporary examples of institutional failure. For example, he points to California's fire department and other agencies where feminist DEI principles were prioritized above actual competence and merit.
And the result was predictable operational disasters, because the focus shifted from objective reality, can this person do the job effectively, to the advantageous lie of ideological compliance.
Crucially, he details the response of one female leader who, when questioned about her inability to carry a man out of danger, a critical task for a firefighter, she dismissed the concern entirely. She didn't try to improve her strength. She blamed the victim.
What did she say?
She said he got himself into the wrong place.
That's the key characteristic of evil highlighted by Peck. The absolute, total absolution of self-responsibility. The moment reality conflicts with the lie, reality must be denied and the victim blamed.
He also points to global failures. Sweden's first feminist government, which was promoted by the UN as a global template, was celebrated for its ideological purity but saw its promises collapse, with homicide rates spiking and gang warfare proliferating.
And the source argues that global entities like the WEF and UN are faltering due to attributed corruption.
Which Brule connects directly back to the lies and ideological rigidity that proliferate under the guise of feminist righteousness.
The author concludes his extensive evidence collection by returning to the primary definition. Ideological feminism is evil because it denies history, the humanity of men, and one's own nature. It seduces women with the false promise of masculine power, which was never theirs to give. This brings us to the author's ultimate, most extreme naming of the enemy.
This is the moment where the intellectual analysis moves fully into mythological naming. Brule states that to come to terms means to arrive at the name. He dubs the invisible, possessing hand behind ideological feminism. Satanina, daughter of Satan, and author of feminism.
That is an undeniably provocative and extreme conclusion, moving from psychological critique to outright mythological naming. How does the author justify that shift from philosophy to explicit theology?
He justifies it by the cumulative evidence of the ideology's fruit. The systematic promotion of hatred, the veneration of death, the denial of reality, and the internal torment of its adherents. He views the ideology itself as a spiritual entity, a meme master, that must be named and confronted as the enemy of the soul.
And the claim is that the true believer feminist is the most precious target.
Paying with her own soul and receiving nothing but eternal torment in return because the promise of power was always a lie.
So, if envy is the driving force of this ideological possession, and rage is the energy required to feed the lie, what is the antidote that can save the individual soul from possession?
The source argues for gratitude. Christian theologians claim that gratitude is the one virtue that fundamentally counters envy and keeps evil at bay. Gratitude roots the individual in the reality of what they have, their existence, their nature, their gifts, rather than what they lack or what others possess.
Conversely, the source claims feminism conspicuously lacks gratitude and actively fosters resentment.
Resentment toward what the author calls the authentic gifts of the feminine, the ability to knit society together, the sacred responsibility of nurturing new life. Feminism, Brule argues, actively denies this core of femininity, derides sacred responsibilities like motherhood as slavery, and through legal frameworks, incentivizes women to actively destroy the family unit through unbalanced divorce laws and false domestic violence charges. It's a mechanism designed to promote resentment over reality.
The path to wholeness, according to the author, is the journey toward joy and holiness, the integrated wholeness of mind, body, and soul.
And that path is aided specifically by self-knowledge, connection to reality, and the affirmation of the centrality of parenthood, reaffirming the importance of mother and father roles. Brule sees the attempt to destroy the family unit and the devaluing of the feminine role as the final suicidal act of the ideology.
Finally, the author returns to the massive historical problem we started with, the vacuum of meaning created by the scientific revolution and atheism.
That vacuum, Brule argues, fuels a plethora of nihilistic movements, environmentalism, BLM, Antifa, and feminism, because people are desperately trying to fill the void left by the denial of God and objective meaning. They are trying to find ultimate significance in lesser causes, which inevitably turn destructive.
So the critical task today, the author concludes, is not simply political fighting, but building a compelling new cosmology.
A cosmology that integrates science, philosophy, and ethology into a cohesive whole, articulating humanity's true place in the universe, the reality that God is being born, and we are part of that long poem. This, he argues, is the only way to heal societal dysfunction and provide humanity with the sense of meaning necessary to foster the gratitude that counters the drive of envy.
The ultimate battle is won one person at a time by rejecting the power of the lie and choosing reality.
Yes. The source material claims both feminism and atheism stand in nihilistic opposition to God reality, and that while feminism is evil, gratitude can save us.
This deep dive has covered massive ground, moving from M. Scott Peck's clinical psychology and the specific horror of the Bobby and the gun case, through Steve Brule's panentheistic worldview and the structure of the noosphere where evil ideas reside, right up to the naming of the invisible hand behind a powerful, modern social movement.
It's just staggering.
The sheer scope of the argument, forcing us to define the divine and the diabolical before offering social critique, is what makes this material so challenging and so unforgettable.
It's a comprehensive, systematic assault on an entire movement using a robust moral framework. A framework that defines moral choice as the moment we encounter a dormant, advantageous lie. The ultimate takeaway from the source material is that the struggle for integrity is universal, mirrored in ancient stories of temptation, and ultimately, knowledge of oneself and connection to reality is the only defense against becoming a host for destructive ideological possession.
The author argues that a crisis of meaning, stemming from the scientific revolution and the subsequent nihilism, made the female psyche particularly vulnerable to this ideology of envy and rage by devastating the identity rooted in the creation of life. So if the meaning vacuum is the root problem, the absence of a compelling cosmological story, what practical reality-aligned vision or story can you help create or promote today to anchor lives and foster the gratitude necessary to counter the drive of envy and ideological possession?